All right, welcome to a Monday version of the Better Man podcast. Thank you for joining me on this Monday, man. Hope you had a great weekend. Hope you got to worship at church. Man, I got to see some really incredible stuff happen at my church. Nothing like people coming to know Jesus Christ. I hope if your church, I hope you're at your church this weekend, if it wasn't the church that I pastor, and that you got to see somebody come to know Jesus Christ, because wow, it is a big deal. I saw hundreds. Maybe you just saw one. Maybe you saw thousands. Whatever it is a big deal. And I loved it. Today, I want to spend a little time, though, helping you get ready for the week. And I want to talk about one of the topics that I was dealing with in my conversation from the stage, my sermon from the stage this weekend. Just one particular point that I think is big for men to pay attention to. May pick another one later this week, not sure, but this particular one, even as I was preaching this weekend, I thought about this for men, and so I wanted to kind of unpack it a little bit further. Don't forget, though, as I get into this, that if you have something to share, if you have something to comment, if you could just heart, like, subscribe, anything that we're doing here on the podcast is a help, and also don't forget that anytime you can share this, click the share button on any podcast, it helps us as well as we kind of get those numbers, get these podcasts in the hands of men who need it. I will say that I'm about to teach something that, again, is deeply rooted in the issue of why we did this podcast, that men oftentimes aren't taught what it is they need to be taught. So I just want to say that this is at the heart of why we did the podcast. The topic I want to deal with today is why men are oftentimes runners. In my conversation on the stage, I was just talking about how you stop running from God, and yes, running from God for sure is an issue for men, but men are oftentimes runners in general. And I've talked about on this podcast about commitment, so I'm not going to really talk about that. I just want to talk about some of the DNA as why you as a man would have a tendency to be a runner, so easily to just, pick up and go. And you watch this happening all the time, especially with men, women as well, no doubt about it, but with men. And so I just jotted down, some of the things that I think are at the heart of that. Maybe you'll agree, maybe it'll resonate with you personally at times where maybe you've run. Perhaps I'm way off, but I think these are probably pretty real things. And so hopefully these help. Why men run. Here's the first thing I wrote down is you don't have a vision. You don't have a God-given vision. Men oftentimes are runners. They pick up and leave. They go they give up easily is because they don't have a vision. As a pastor of the church that I pastor, man, I've had many times of hurt and difficulty and frustration and times where, it's like, oh my goodness, this is so difficult, doing what we do for our community, trying to reach people, and it's so labor intensive and it's so easy to just want to, oh my gosh, quit. But what keeps me going is a vision. It is a vision for our community. It is a vision for people to live better, men, women, families. It is a vision to make a difference. It is a vision for a church that is making a difference. So there's a lot there. And I just keep moving ahead because of that vision. In my marriage, there are tough times. But what causes me to want to keep going is I have a vision for my marriage. I want to be well done, my good and faithful servant in my marriage. I want to finish the race well. I want to have a great marriage, healthy marriage. I want my kids, my family to see what quality marriage could be. So I'm just sharing with you that I have a vision. And I think that's one of the key things here, visionless men. What is your vision for your marriage? 10, 20, 30, 50 years. What is your vision for your career? What is your vision for your God-given talent? What is your vision for your family? And so if you have those things in place, you keep fighting despite the circumstances that are going on. Here's the next thing I put down is that men are fearful. So when opportunity to advance comes or take another big step, when an opportunity comes where they might have to fight harder or dig in deeper, fear kicks in. And so then because of that fear, they begin to respond in that fear. And oftentimes our response when we are in fear is not one of moving forward, it's one of withdrawal. So you see a lot of men are runners. They pick up and leave in all kinds of situations because of fear. What if I have to step up and really help her, in the marriage? What will I find out if maybe I don't have what it takes? So I don't want to know whether I have what it takes or not to be a great husband. So I'm scared of that. What if I fail? So I'm in fear and I run. Many times you can look back on times when you gave up, on times when you were a runner, and you will see fear at the heart of it. I was gonna, but I was afraid. I was gonna, and so much of that is fear. So I think as a man, you got to check yourself when you're thinking about bailing, and you say, well, what about fear? Here's another thing I wrote down is that you don't want to take responsibility. Touched on this in the last couple of podcasts that women see this as a great frustration with men. But the men that are doing well in relationships do take responsibility. So I won't rehash this too much, but obviously in moments of great crisis as a man, even if she has a part and you have a part, or even if the other person, if you're in a situation where, like, again, I'm leading an organization, and things aren't going well, at the end of the day, I've got to come to a place where I take responsibility. Yes, maybe there was a failure by somebody else in the ministry, but it ultimately falls back on me, and I have to own that consistently if I'm going to be successful. In every area of your life, you have to do that as well. And I'm not here to say I've always done that. I've failed at times at this as well. But in the end, you have to see this as a man that you have to take responsibility at times, right? To own up and say, well, this is my part. I've always said, people will say, well, they'll when they're dealing with a marriage struggle, they'll come to me and they'll say, Pastor, you know what? It was all her fault. Or a woman will say it was all his fault. No, it wasn't. There's always responsibility on both ends. And if you're just living in a delusional world if you're not willing to take responsibility. I wrote this down, is that probably one of the key reasons is that you're emotionally unstable. Why does a man run? It's because he's emotionally unstable. I can almost certainly guarantee that when the going gets tough and you get going, at the heart of your abandonment, at the heart of your inability to dig in, at the heart of your desire to run away from responsibility is going to be an emotional brokenness. You've had times of hurt in the past, and you've had times of messiness in the past, and not only does it create fear, you're just emotionally unsteady. So it would be like this. I'm facing a tough moment, and so here's what I say. I'm done. I'm out. I make an emotional response. Where does an emotional response come from? It comes from on the inside. When you make rash, emotional judgments, decisions, choices, that's coming from in here. And when it comes from in here, and that rash and broken, that means that there's something going on here that was broken. And oftentimes it stems from things deep inside, things from a long time ago that you don't want to talk about, that you got locked up, and you think it's no big deal. You think it's been compartmentalized because you're so good at that. But then it comes out in moments like that, and it's rather embarrassing, of course, but still, it's a sign of something in here. And so I said men are runners because of oftentimes emotional instability. I've talked about how oftentimes men will say, yeah, it's the women that are emotional and I don't have no emotional problems. And yet abandonment and your inability to dig in as a man is so much related to your emotional instability. Last thing I put down is that men are runners just because they learned this. It's a learned behavior, right? You can look back at times where maybe you watched another man, maybe a very influential man, maybe your father, maybe generations of men in your family, aunts and uncles and grandfather, who when things got tough, they ran, and you watched this. You saw bailout was easy, and so you took it over. You take it. You do bailout because they did bailout. You watched your dad give up on things in life. You watched your dad quit things when he said he was going to be responsible, and so then you just said, well, that's what I'll do. And so you've just embraced that in your own life. It's a learned behavior. So you have to be able to see that you may have chosen this behavior of giving up and running based on something that you learned. Now, coming back and just kind of wrapping all of this up, all these things are things that God helps you with. It always comes back to God, right? Because maybe your father didn't teach you, but God can teach you. So if I think about vision, God can instill vision in your life. I can attest to this firsthand, and I know other men can as well. God can overcome your fears. God can cause you to take personal responsibility by strengthening your validation with God, so you're not afraid any longer to take responsibility. God can teach you the things you did not learn from your father and teach you how to be a committed man. God can teach you how to get emotionally healthy in your life. He can help you with that. So all these things come back to God. I just want to point you to that. And I want to maybe help you as a man. Just go back just right now and just, do you have vision in every area of your life? Vision for your family and what it should look like in the long run? Do you have a vision, for your spiritual life? Do you have a vision for your career? And when you have vision, it is a big driver. That's all I got to say, and I'll pray. Thanks, God, for another opportunity to do the podcast, speak to the men, help them grow. We're in a place as men where we're learning more and more to become men who are not runners, but dig in when we need to dig in. So help us, and it'll be by your strength and power that this will happen in Jesus' name. Amen. Hey, talk to you Wednesday. Thanks for joining me on the podcast.